This is the condensed version of our poster workshop. So in the spring, if you're interested, as Alexander mentioned, in presenting at the university poster session or at the college poster session during Research Week, which we really hope that you do, we will have a longer poster session, workshop, as well as some additional workshops on presenting effectively. So if you've missed something or if I go too fast, you'll have another opportunity to hear what I'm going to say. So today we're going to talk about the elements of an effective poster, how to design a poster, including what software is good to use, how to find images to use in your poster if you aren't able to create them yourself, and then also how to appropriately cite things for your poster. So who has conducted a poster session before or been to a poster session before? So a few of us. It's a really great way to get started presenting your research. When I was in my first graduate program, the first kind of research presentation that I ever did was a poster session with all the other graduate students from the PASHE schools, and that was a really great opportunity for me to get started with doing research and talking about my research. So posters can be a little bit less high stakes than like a big paper presentation. There's still a lot of work that goes into it, but it's a different way of communicating. Anyone that's done a poster or went to a poster session, do you have a poster that sticks out to you that you said, that's a really great poster, I really remember that? What did it look like?
There were a lot of great graphics. It wasn't a lot of words on the screen, and the graphics told the story. It was easy to follow.
Yeah, one of the last poster sessions that I participated in, I didn't get a chance to go look at the poster because I was presenting a poster, but they had this huge red ribbon that ran through the middle of their poster. And so when you're thinking about doing a research poster, you want to think, what can I communicate graphically, visually, that's going to stand out and draw someone to come look at my research? So a wall of text is probably not going to do that. We need to think about what can we take that we might have communicated in words, maybe in a paper, and turn it into a visual image that can really draw the reader in and communicate our message in a different way. So posters are about form and they're about content. So it's not going to be you necessarily standing there and giving a speech, or like you might on a panel have 5 minutes to talk to someone. You might only have a minute or two as they're walking past you to kind of briefly explain what you did in your research and what the impacts are. And you really want to communicate more visually than textually. And the people at your poster session, they're going to be walking around. They're not going to necessarily be standing in one place for a very long time. So you want to make sure that you can grab their attention from far away, pull them over to your spot, and share the information that you want to share with them very quickly. So the things that make posters stand out are that they're focused. You're not trying to communicate too many things in one space. Your real estate on your poster is very valuable. You don't really have a lot of space to work with, and so everything that ends up on there has to be the most important thing. What is the overall message that you want someone to see and walk away with and understand about your research? They also need to be graphic. So this kind of guideline is having less than 800 words total on your poster. Maybe you can be a little bit more flexible depending on how large of a poster you're allowed to have, and that will differ depending on the poster presentation that you are presenting at. But it's always a really good rule of thumb to try to communicate with graphs and images on a poster rather than a lot of text, because think about when you see something that is just all text and it's presented to you. Does that make you feel overwhelmed? Does it make you want to engage with it, or just be like, no, I'm gonna go look to the next one? So think about all the ways that you can visually communicate other than just having paragraphs and paragraphs of text. Also, it needs to be ordered and make sense. There needs to be a flow through the images on your poster and the text on your poster that is easily understood, so someone knows, okay, kind of like when you look at a scholarly research paper and you have the introduction, the methods, the conclusion, the discussion, you know that order and you can follow it and understand it. And there should be a similar kind of order to your poster. So I have some undergraduate background in graphic design, and I'm still very passionate about it, even though that's not kind of my primary job anymore. And so when I was doing my graphical design training, we were never allowed to take our ideas and go straight to the software. We always had to sketch it out on paper first and have it approved by our editor or by our professor before we could move on and actually commit those ideas into technology. And technology is cheap, digital pictures are free, but it's a lot harder to think on that computer screen when you're looking at something that is a visual communication method. So like I said, you probably might have a paper or some other large body of research that your poster is based on. So you want to outline what are the most important things from my research that I want to communicate in this poster, and make sure you write those things down so you think about how they're going to end up on your poster. Then you can look at examples of other posters. That's how I got started and how sometimes I still do get started when I'm stuck. Look at other posters that are online. There's a lot of different repositories that are available. We also, all of the posters that are done for Research Week, we're trying to put into Scholarsphere, which is our institutional repository for Penn State. So that's one other place that you can go to look for posters. Once you kind of have your ideas down, what are the most important things that you want to cover? What do you kind of generally want it to look like? That's when I would just grab a piece of paper and start sketching it out. And then when you actually go to the software to lay it out, you have a roadmap to work from. You're not starting from scratch saying like, oh, where should I put this? Where should I put that? You've already thought it through, and it'll take you less time to design when you actually go to the software. So the main components, like I said, are really similar to what you might have in a research paper. You're going to have a title with the authors and the names. If you have collaborators or a department that has sponsored you, or you've gotten a grant, you're going to want to acknowledge that. You need to introduce your research problem that you're addressing. You need to discuss the methods that you used to address the problem, your results, what did you find out? How is this significant to the community, to society, to your profession, to this area of research? What have you learned? What have you concluded? What might you hope to do next? And then briefly, references and acknowledgements. I have seen in my time people that have a whole huge box for references and acknowledgements, and that's really important, and it's great to acknowledge the people that you that have helped you to this point, and also if you've cited things to have those there. But that might be a good idea to have a handout with you with more of that information rather than put it on your poster. So we're kind of looking at this as a list, or that's kind of like a sample layout of what a poster might look like. I prefer to use this list format rather than the box format, because that old instructors used to call it boxitis. You want to put everything in a box, and you can lose a lot of white space. It can be a little bit tired to look at. So you can think about it either way, but your poster doesn't have to always look like these boxes. You can just start with your list and then think about, where do I want these items to go? And so we have some more boxes here, but the boxes can all move. So does anyone know what visual grammar is? So visual grammar is how you communicate with images. So just as you would communicate with text, it's the same kind of thing. How are you telling your story with images? So think about that. How can I translate this text into an image? Column structure, I think that we're all pretty familiar with column structure. So we have these boxes here, and then the other example, there are boxes there. So you can think about maybe laying out your poster as a grid. That's one way to kind of, not every item has to take up all of the grid. Maybe it takes up 2 columns over here and 1 column over there. You could have different, depending on the importance and the size of the image or the information that you're putting in, decide how many columns it's going to take up. White space. White space is one of the most important things to think about when you're trying to communicate visually. Does anyone know what white space is? I want to share.
The empty area between images or text.
Yeah, so the white space is the empty area around all of the elements on your poster, and that's what gives your eye a break when you're looking at something. So I mentioned that wall of text before that can be so overwhelming and just kind of make people want to disengage and back away because this is just too much for me to look at. So white space is really your friend. I know you have so much information that you're trying to communicate and you only have so many inches on that poster to get all that information in, but it's really important to think about where you can provide a break for the eye as you're communicating. So we also have something called reader gravity, and that is a way to describe where the eye is drawn in whatever's in front of you. So in front of a poster or a paper or things like that. The traditional understanding of the reader gravity is that it starts up at the left-hand corner and goes down into the right-hand corner. So the thinking there is that the most important things need to kind of fall along that line. So over here in my box where reader gravity is, that's kind of where you'd put the least important thing. And you'd put the most important thing up at the top, in the middle, and then over to the side. And all of these structures together create visual unity. So visual unity shows that your work is complete, that it's cohesive, that it makes sense to the viewer. There's not kind of chaotic things happening and it seems unbalanced. And that's kind of one of those things where you know it when you see it. You know when something doesn't really seem cohesive and seems a little bit scattered, and you also know that's something that's clean, it makes sense, it's clear, it's easy to see and understand, and I like looking at it. So these are just some examples of symmetry. So I showed you kind of that traditional box format before, and they don't all have to look like that. The important thing is that your items look balanced. So all of these different examples have different types of symmetry, and they don't all look the same, but they still look balanced, right? So you can always, that's why sketching things out is good. You can always erase and move things around and decide how do you want your images and your text and your information to be balanced across the page. So we really have a lot of different ways that we can do that. And when you start on the paper, it's easier to just grab another piece of paper because you can look at it in front of you, whereas if you're on a screen, you're probably gonna have to be zooming and dragging and clicking, and it's harder to kind of get the full scale of what you're trying to create on a screen rather than starting from a written page. So we have three major elements of design that we're going to talk about. We have font, we have color, and we have size. And the color and size applies not only to the font, but also to the images and to the backgrounds and graphs and things that you'll be using. I'm a font nerd, so get ready for some font trivia. So let's think about bad font. Everybody can curly cues, and Comic Sans is the favorite punching bag of the graphic design community. Nobody likes Comic Sans. So you want to pick a clean font that is easy to understand and that you use it consistently. My guidelines here are 2 to 3 different fonts, maybe one for your heading, one for your title, and one for your body. I would even more go towards just having 2. You have one serif font that you use for title and headings, and you have one sans serif font that you use for the body text. Can anyone tell me the difference between serif and sans serif font? In the back. Yep, serif has the little curly cues. Sans serif that we have here doesn't have any of those little kind of guiding lines. And so that is supposed to make it easier for your eye to look at a larger block of text if it's sans serif. So you want to use serif fonts for smaller headings, titles, big things that you want to stand out, and then you would use the body text for your longer boxes. I would also say some people are drawn to using more fonts to kind of emphasize different sections. I would say instead of using different fonts, try using italics. Don't make a whole paragraph italics, but if you have a specific word or a phrase or concept that you want to stand out, maybe use bold, use italics, and that's a way to change up what the font looks like without using an entirely different font. And that can contribute to your visual unity, to your cohesiveness of using a similar font and making small changes to help things stand out. And also when you're doing those text boxes, make sure that you're using about 50 words or less. So this is just an example of using bold, we don't have any italics here, and different sizes to kind of make certain things stand out. I'm not sure, it might be a little bit washed out to understand there, but we have a heading font, we have our body text that's a slightly smaller size, and we have some bolds throughout to kind of emphasize certain parts of our research. Then we have color. Color can be used to connect different sections, different ideas. If you have a certain concept that you want to acknowledge with a color, that's really great. And you can use it to direct the eye through the display. So like that big red ribbon that drew you down that that center of gravity, that reader gravity in the poster that I remember from one of the last sessions that I did, you can do a similar thing. I would say to be very careful with color. If you are going to put font in a different color other than like a dark gray or a black or something like that, you need to have a reason for it, not just to be visually interesting, and you need to do it really sparingly, because we do want to think about accessibility. If people have visual impairments, or just think about looking at that yellow L, that's really hard to look at for a long period of time. You wouldn't want to use a lot of bright colors, so you want to make sure for accessibility purposes that you use a lot of contrast. Don't use colors that are too close together to try to make sure that things stand out and that people can read them. And you want things to be as simple as possible. So I would say focus on color in the background of your poster, and also if you have different visual or graphic elements are really great places to add color. I wouldn't do so much with adding color in terms of text. So for this example, we just have a few colors that were spliced in to kind of show how it makes it stand out, but it's done sparingly. So size. Size is another way of making things stand out, and this can apply to images on your poster, to your text. There's a lot of different things that you can do with size, and the bigger that you make something, the more important that thing better be. So if it doesn't really have anything to do with your research, you probably shouldn't have a giant picture of it or a giant graph if it's not really the main point that you're trying to make. You also need to think about the size of your font so that it's large enough to read for someone from 5 or 6 feet away, and have your title be big enough so that someone across the room can see your title and say, that sounds really interesting, I want to go over there and take a look at that. More font trivia. How do we measure font? What is the unit of measurement that you use for font? 12 point. Okay, cool. So a point is a measurement that we use in typography and in graphic design. And just for your future reference, a point is 1/72 of an inch. So if you were using 72-point font, your letters are 1 inch high. So that can just be a good way to think about when you're choosing what size font something should be. Just remember, if you move to that 72-point font range, your letters are 1 inch high. So your title, we have our big wombat up there, might be around 100 points, maybe a little bit smaller, depending on how big your poster is allowed to be for your session. If you're doing headings, around 32 points. Subheadings, 20 points, and the body text somewhere between 16 and 18. For your body text, someone's going to be right up at your poster reading that. So it's okay that that's smaller, but the big parts you want to have very large so that they can be seen from a distance to draw someone to your poster. So let's take a quick minute here. I have an example poster. This was not created by me. This is from someone at Penn State Wilkes-Barre. And what do you think about this poster? So thinking about that reader gravity, I see we have over in kind of the low rent real estate of my poster, some of the images of the Lego robot that this class made. So it's good to have that image there to kind of show what they did, but it's not that important to the research, so it's probably a good idea that it's over there. Does anybody have thoughts about the color or the font or anything like that? I think that it might be good to use the colors for the heading. You could have just also made it bold. They decided to go with blue. It fits in with the Penn State banner at the top, and it kind of fits in with these word clouds that they made, and it matches with one of their data lines. So I think that they kind of did a good job of making the colors cohesive and kind of all meld together really nicely. I don't necessarily know, it looks like this font is bolded for their body text. They probably didn't need to bold that. That's a little bit heavy.
There's a lot of white space.
There is a lot of white space, so you don't get overwhelmed. They do have a bit of text, but I don't feel overwhelmed looking at it because there is a lot of white space to break it up. They used bullets over on their results, so it's kind of easy to read and things like that. Any other thoughts about the poster? Okay, we'll move along. So I quickly want to mention a few different software and design tools that you can use. Everybody's pretty familiar with PowerPoint. That's kind of one of the most basic tools to use for designing your poster. You just set it up as a slide, and under Design in the tabs, change the slide size to the dimensions that you are required to have by your poster session. So that's really easy to do. If you've used PowerPoint at all just for your own presentations, you know that you can move everything around very easily. And so that makes it a really great tool to kind of just get started with. We have templates available here from marketing at Harrisburg that you can use. In the libraries, we have templates that we can use, so that makes it really easy to work with. And there's also a lot of freely available templates online that you can use if you're not comfortable with making your own template. And I would say if I need to make a poster really quickly, this is where I go, just because it's very quick and easy to use and makes a lot of sense. When I have more time and more energy and resources to think about my poster, I might use Canva, which is a web-based tool. It is free to make an account, and a lot of the items on there are free. You can also have a paid account, or you can purchase individual fonts, images, and things like that from them. And I've seen some really great posters created with Canva, but I would say there's a bit of a learning curve there, and it can take some time to get used to working with it. So if you're crunched for time, I would not recommend Canva, but if you've got some time to play around, you can make some really interesting posters in Canva. Now that we have Creative Cloud at Penn State, everybody also has access to InDesign. If you have a lot of time and some background in graphical design, I would also recommend InDesign. I really like using it to design documents, and you have to import all of your own things. They don't just live there like in PowerPoint. You have different smart graphs and art and clip art and things like that, and also in Canva, there's a lot of free images and things that you can work with, graphs that you can create. In InDesign, you've got to create all of that somewhere else and bring it in yourself. But that can be really helpful for really nice design jobs, and if you have specific colors that need to be matched, like if you're doing something very scientific and the color really matters to be presented correctly, you can use Pantone colors, and this is what is used for the professional print settings. So sometimes it's better to tell me with art than tell me with words. We're almost out of time, so I do want to make a quick point. Copyright is really important. Citations are really important. Though it's kind of going against my librarianship training, not having pixelized images on your poster is kind of the most important thing to me. It's really kind of embarrassing to go and see someone's huge poster and their images are super blurry. So pixelization, we have our little pixelized Mona Lisa here. It's when the dots per inch that are used to print out your image get too small. So any image that you find that you'd want to use on your poster, a lot of times when we see something on a screen, it looks okay, but then when we try to make it bigger, and you're going to need to make it bigger to put it on like a 4-foot poster, those dots, there's not enough of them to keep the image from going pixelated and getting blurry. You can check the dots per inch on your image by right-clicking and looking at the properties, and it will tell you what the DPI is. If you are going to be printing out and making an image larger, you want no less than 200 dots per inch, and it should be at least 300. And we want to make sure that we're using good graphics that really contribute back to the research that we're trying to tell. So I have a picture of a tiger in here later. You shouldn't just use images of tigers unless you're like, this is how we learned about tiger anatomy, and you're labeling the image of the tiger. Other ways to find images, a lot of things are available to us under fair use because we're doing it for research or scholarship. So you do need to cite it, but if you didn't create it, you can still usually use it. If you're concerned about copyright issues, we also have something called Creative Commons, and there's lots of free images online that are licensed to you with Creative Commons. You usually just need to attribute it to whoever took that picture. And we have a lot of resources. I'm happy to share these slides with anyone afterwards to help them find images for their posters if you can't or haven't been able to take or create your own images. So these are some resources where you can find those images. And again, I can share these with you. Flickr and Pixabay are two of my favorite places to look for Creative Commons images. You can find a lot of free, high-quality images there. Anything that you didn't create, you should cite, including graphs, pictures, and then kind of traditional like you would cite in a literature review. So same thing, make sure that you give attribution, especially if it's required by Creative Commons. Even if no attribution is required, it's a good idea to have the creator or where you found it. So there's an example of a no attribution required image from Pixabay. There's the tiger. Make sure that you revise your poster and do it when you're kind of in that paper phase before you get it to the digital phase, and also definitely before you actually print it out. Posters are very costly, and there's nothing worse than getting this poster and realizing you can't print it again and you misspelled something or your image is pixelized, and there's really nothing you can do unless you want to spend a lot more money to have that printed. So make sure you have your peers or your mentor or your professor take a look at things and provide feedback, and the library is always here to support you.